who and where you want to be in 5 years. Who are you spending time with? How do you feel in your body? How do you feel in your mind? What are you spending time on? What's the vibe in your home? It's not like you're going to suddenly be that person tomorrow, but what it will often do is reveal to you your most authentic goals.
This is Get Well Better, a podcast by The Lambie. I'm your host, Chloe Haruch. Today, I'm joined by the brilliant and beloved Neha Ruch, founder of Mother Untitled and author of The Power Pause. If you haven't read it, do yourself a favor and go grab a copy. Neha is leading an empowering conversation around motherhood, ambition, and identity, giving voice to a generation of women choosing to pause or pivot their careers with intention and confidence. This episode is a must listen for anyone navigating the mental, emotional, and psychological shifts of modern motherhood. So I'm excited to talk to you because I feel like you've become the voice of people feeling really confident and empowered and almost smart in their decision to pause their careers, their life, whatever it is that they've sort of predefined as success, pre-motherhood, into motherhood, and everything in between. I feel like this is actually a very unique podcast episode for us because we typically always interview specialists in the medical field or in the wellness field. And so I'm sure a lot of our listeners are like, how does this relate? Well, for me, it relates a lot because I think that this problem is what's sort of driving the stress levels up of most moms that I know. And so I wanted to be able to bring you on to really sort of help give a different perspective on how to approach this phase of life and do it with a really intentional and individualized mentality. So thank you so much for coming on. I would love to start off by hearing a little bit more about your incredible, impressive background, because I feel like so much of why this movement could only happen with you starts with your really impressive education and career.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for making room for a conversation that might seem non-traditional in this context of health and wellness. But I was just reminded that maybe before we start, I'll share that the definition of the power pause that I offer at the beginning of the book is when a woman shifts time and attention away from paid work to make room for other priorities, whether that be health, childcare, elder care, and in doing so, is actually able to expand her interests, her network, and her sense of self so that she can, in fact, come back stronger. And so I share that because I think, ambition is so related to career in our culture. But as we're going to talk about, it can be such a more expansive definition, and it should include our health. But took me a long time to understand that. And my own story started actually, if I were to date back, it was when I was very little. We immigrated here when I was 3. I moved to an all-white town outside of Boston. And this is only relevant because I was really focused on belonging. And when that didn't come to me easily, I went and sought that in a gap year before it was called a gap year between high school and college. I went and I traveled to India for a while. And when I was there, I realized that when you take a step off the path, you actually can quiet some of the noise and figure out what really matters. And I came back, and what really mattered was my professional life. And I think I found a sense of belonging, a sense of worth, a sense of accomplishment in climbing the ladder. And I got very lucky. I graduated college quickly. I graduated in 3 years. I landed a job at a very small social media boutique. And that was before Twitter had started, right? And so when Twitter launched and the blogosphere was about to boom, they were like, oh, well, you're 22. You can take this over. And, why I call that lucky is because when you're in the right place and right time, the right person asked me to come help build the digital strategy arm of a very large agency. And so for that reason, I was able to sort of climb the ranks early. And I think because of that, just continued to glean a lot of self-perception from that. And I actually ended up deciding that I wanted to change tack. And someone described to me business school as a train stop to surround yourself with smart people and think. about what came next, which is also interesting because the next time I found that was in motherhood. But I went to Stanford Business School. I left there and landed what on paper was my dream job, running tech at a startup. If you got married in sort of in the 2012 through 2020 era, you might have used it. It's called Zola, and I loved it. Except it's still, I felt like it was almost like I was still looking for that belonging. And then I had my first son, and I was with him in sort of the wee hours of the night. And I just felt like a sense of peace. Not to say that I wasn't sleep deprived, not to say that I wasn't like leaking everywhere, but it was that sense of belonging I'd been looking for my entire life. And I did choose to initially downshift and then pause my career to make room for that.
And I feel like the way you just described it is like made it sound like it was an easy decision. I'm sure it really wasn't. And so what were the emotions that were going through your mind at that time? Like it sounded like you felt something that you had never felt before, which was probably your first clue, but then I'm sure there was this societal pressure to continue on, the rat race of building your career and being impressive in the ways that you had previously defined success. So how did you wrestle with this decision to pause?
Yeah, I think motherhood builds a superpower, which is making decisions that feel uncomfortable and going with your intuition and tuning out other people's perceptions. But I made that first one for me. And by the way, you get that when you're co-sleeping or you're sleep training or you're bottle feeding or you're breastfeeding or you're going to private school or public school. Like you're going to make that decision over and over, and people will always have something to say about it. I've been lucky. No one had had a lot to say yet about my journey until I announced I wanted to take my foot off the gas, and I immediately started hearing first from my husband, who you've met and is my biggest supporter. But he said to me, I just think you're going to be bored all day. And then I had other people in my circle say, well, are you giving up? I had the worst of it was, but then why did you bother going to business school? You took a spot. And I think all of it basically added up to a realization that for whatever reason, and I knew I came to learn the reason, right? We were existing at the height of the lean in movement, the height of the girl boss era. So I had my first son on New Year's Day of 2016, and that was the rallying cry. And me choosing something different really, I think it conjured up very old fashioned images. There was no one saying, yes, this is still an ambitious choice. You're not going to lose yourself. And that's what was really the catalyst for Mother Untitled. But it took having to move through that friction myself, trust myself, and know. And I think that was the one gift I had. I did feel very clear. And maybe it is that I brought up that gap year between high school. I felt very clear that when you take a beat, and almost like I described business school, when you take a train stop and you surround yourself with interesting things. So I want to share a little bit that when I chose to pause with Bodhi, and I initially downshifted to 2 days a week. So I had a cushion that helped, I think that was like a helpful way to sort of test that this was going to feel right for our family financially, that it was going to feel right for me from a sort of fulfillment in the day to day. I didn't choose though, because I thought it was better for Bodhi. Like I really want to clarify that I did not choose to shift my career for more time with him solely for more time. I did want that time. I really did. I also chose because I wanted to get to know myself in this new version. And I felt really clear
I
on that.
love, I love, I love, 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 love when you say this and you emphasize this point. I remember getting the same goosebumps when you mentioned this at your book launch. You said so explicitly, this wasn't a decision that I made because it was in the best interest for my son. It was in the best interest for me.
Yeah.
And I feel like, there's so much mom guilt in the direction of you should focus and prioritize on your kids. They need you. You're their mom. Like this is such a unique moment in their lives. It goes by so quickly. But I remember feeling this way when we first met. There's this other camp of women that I fall into, and I'm almost sometimes embarrassed by it, where I'm like, I didn't feel that instant connection to being a mom. Like, I remember asking myself, like, am I a bad mom because I don't feel the need to spend more time than I am spending with my kids and I already am? Like, I feel like I'm at my max. And I know
Mm-hmm.
that relative to a lot of other people, I'm not spending that much time with my kids. And so I almost felt mom guilt, but in the reverse direction.
Right.
Um,
Right. You're damned if you do, you're
so
damned if you don't. And I can honestly
yeah, it was,
now done all, right? I've worked full time out of the home. I've worked part time, been at home full time. I've been at home with help, without help. And I can say with certainty, even though the research also backs this up, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you before, but there's a great piece of research by Stuart Friedman. It's now dated. It's from 2014, and it was published in the Harvard Business Review about how our careers impact our children. Bottom line is zero, right? Like that there are healthy and happy and ambitious outcomes, whether you work out of the home or in the home. There's absolutely no correlation. The biggest correlation is the presence, measured not by time and hours, but measured by headspace and desire to connect in the time you have available, which then, you can go on to like expound on that and say that that's really fueled your ability to be present for your children is if you are feeling whole and healthy. And I think it is very normal to feel a call toward your career. If and by the way, I feel that now. My children are at a different stage, and I feel like my ability to do this work now, almost 10 years later, allows me to show up for them in a different way.
Yeah, there are so many societal pressures around like what you should do as a mom, how much time you should give. Should you breastfeed? Should you take a pause? Should you get home in time for bath? Should you be the ones potty training your kids? Like there's so many things that you're supposed to do. And I feel like there are so many different actors, stakeholders judging you all at the same time. And it's impossible to please everyone. And so I know, when I'm faced with this conversation and I'm in my defensive mode, I'm like, I know that this is what I need to do in order to feel fulfilled. And this is my perfect balance, but that's definitely going to be different from your perfect balance. Yeah, I always just sort of revert back to the realization that this is what makes me happy. Like I'm actually blessed that I love my work. I do love my kids, but I also have a limit of how much time I can spend time with them. And I feel like everyone has their perfect ratio and everyone should just be confident in that. But it's so much easier said than done. So how do you, in all the interactions that you've had with women, because in not only just having Mother Entitled, but now in founding your book, you've interviewed so many women. And I don't know if you've coached women along the way, but like, what advice would you give to a woman who's so not confident in that balance and is questioning, removing herself from the workforce and becoming irrelevant or becoming, purposeless, or is my brain just going to go to mush? Like, how do you coach someone through that? And I already know what you're going to say, and I love what you're going to say. So that's why I'm literally setting you up because I love this answer.
But I have a couple different things I want to say. First, on the point of defensiveness, because thank you for saying that. I think that that is what we all need to hold, is that for so long, women have been pitted against each other with this false narrative that one is better for feminism and ambition, and one is better for our children. And we've been fed this idea that there's a right or a wrong and a very binary black and white, and this work and family piece. And the reality is there's not. And there is actually no one choice per the research that is better besides the one that's right for you and your family. And I think when we realize and start to own the choice, just like you and I did, that it is a personal choice. It's not for better outcomes for our children. It's for, in some cases, it may be, by the way, if there's a severe health diagnosis or, with sort of certain circumstances aside, for the most part, we are making these choices if we indeed have the privilege to make the choice because of our own needs and wants and understanding of our family circumstance. And when we own that and we don't make it about the kids, then I think we sort of put down the defensiveness. I think the other piece, actually, which I would say in response to what, for the woman who's feeling like, oh my God, should I do this? Is that it's a long game, right? I think, the research, so we commissioned a survey called the American Mothers on Pause survey with a research firm called Proof Insights. And we polled 1,200 at-home parents and 1,000 members of the general population. 1 in 3 women working out of the home currently are going to pause their careers in the next 2 years. 1 in 2 who are currently working out of the home are planning on downshifting their hours, so less than 20 hours a week. 90% of women who are currently on pause are aiming to return to the workforce, which just goes to show that we're actually more alike than we are different, and we are all ever evolving and ever shifting. So to the woman who's sort of at the precipice of some decision, either way, I say this is for one moment in time. It is a long freaking game. And what we want is never to say pauses are the right choice or returning to work. It's just to put more options on the table to make this all sustainable. So with that in mind, I think to the woman who feels like her brain's going to go die if she takes this pause and or a downshift. Anytime I think women are faced with, I've worked so hard to get here, am I really going to shift? And I would say to them what we sort of led with, that ambition by dictionary definition is the determination to do things, right? And we're going to do things that we care about, many different things we care about over the long game of life. So it is very natural to shift our focus and shift our priorities and shift our time. And as long as we are doing that with care and intention, you are still ambitious. You are trusting yourself. I think the other piece of this is that we've been fed this very like stagnant caricature of the at-home parent, right? We've been fed like there's working mother over here, and then there's the at-home mother. And in the same research I talked about commissioning, we polled the American public on who they think of as the stay-at-home mom, and they say June Cleaver, who is a remnant from the 1950s sitcom Leave It to Beaver. If you poll the American public on who they think of as a working mom, they will say, stack rank order, Michelle Obama, Sheryl Sandberg, and Beyonce, right? Like the power chasm is just so vast that, of course, the woman who is sitting here being like, no, I really either have a very valid want to spend more time with the kids, or the cost of childcare is too much, or the stress in my home is feeling like too much. I want to be, of course, she's feeling like, oh my God, but is that who I'm going to become? And what I say to her is that that was never a realistic portrait of women who were doing the care work at home. And it definitely isn't now. Meaning that the woman taking a career pause right now had her child at the average age of 30, and that skews older on the coast. You've accrued education and work experience, so you're not like tripping and falling into motherhood. Dads are spending 3 times the amount of time with their kids than any generation before. So you're not like serving your husband cocktails at the end of the day. You have access to digital tools and technology so that you can stay current, stay connected, stay creative. And, you know, all of this is to say that that caricature you've been fed, that's definition of ambition and feminism, is just so old, and it was due for a narrative upgrade. Your career pause is not your life pause. You will grow, you will learn. If you obviously, I've created a strategic roadmap for it, but if you take a little bit of intention, you'll actually be able to, you know, build a story that will just add to the identity you've already built with incredible
Yeah.
experience.
I think that for someone who is naturally ambitious, you are right in that they will use this time to reflect and reevaluate and repurpose that ambition towards something that resonates with them more at this new stage of life. But I think there are the non-type A people out there who are really scared about not having work to force them into structure or like force them into an ambitious path, that without it, they are worried that they'll never be motivated to get back into the workforce. And then they question, okay, but then what happens when my kids grow up and they're in school? And now I do need something to occupy my time. So I think there's that camp of people. And then I think there's also the camp of people that think, yes, I want to spend more time with my kids, but I also want to have an excuse to not be with them when I don't want to be with them. And I feel like work is the only justifiable excuse. Like if I'm not making income, then how can I validate to my husband or my partner that it's okay for me to not pick up my kids from school one day because I'd rather go do something else? And I think they don't know whether that's something else they can stand behind and defend it, quote unquote, to those other stakeholders that are judging what they're doing. So I think there are so many different pressures at play. And I'm sure you see that all the time. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of that is in the book, but the second chapter, I think, to your second piece, which is how do you defend wanting to stay whole and healthy and creative, and what happens if you don't do paid work? Are you allowed to invest in yourself still? I want to talk a little bit about the financial piece, even if for your listeners, it's a financial no-brainer. I still think it's a very important foundational part of stepping into a pause or career shift with power, which is making sure that you and your partner, in the case of two-parent households, have had really explicit conversations about the why and the how of this decision, because it is a two-person-led organization. Family systems are complicated organizations, and I think it's important to see it as such. It's why that chapter is really chock full of scripts to be able to navigate it together. And part of it is to be able to say, if one parent is shifting their career, their paid work to be available to the household, right? What is that providing the other partner? Is it providing the other, while the parents, I think one of the big fears is, am I going to become a financial dependent? Like, I've been independent for so long. Well, I offer this idea that actually this is the time where you and your partner are going to say, you know what, if we weren't before, we are really an interdependent organization with these little, like, big responsibilities under our roof. And yes, the partner working out of the home is providing the pay and the income, but the partner working in the home is providing care work. And that care work isn't just the manually, like the being there in the hours, but it's the intellectual labor, it's the emotional labor, it's the security net of being there in the evening so the other partner can single task outside of the home, right? I always say that my husband was running a tech startup during those years, and he was able to do it at the level he was able to do it at because he never had to think about who was going to be home at the end of the day to relieve a babysitter, right? Even when we had a babysitter for periods there. And so I think that that is a really important dialogue to have for a couple of reasons. One, you establish that you are doing this together. Two, you realize that that household income is now shared. Three, you're assigning budgets for different things, right? Like home care, children's activities, and you're also including a line item for other things that you need to be healthy and whole co-leaders of this organization, right? Because you're both doing immense work.
Yeah.
You're both depending on each other, and you both deserve investment and whatever resources to be able to support each other in that way. So I pause there in case you have follow-ups, but I do want to get back to this idea of how do you step into a career pause with a sense of ambition for yourself? Because I think
Yeah.
that's like pretty much
Yeah.
the crux
Go
of the book.
there. Go there.
Okay. So if you've now stepped into this chapter of your life, right, you're understanding that no, you're not giving up your ambition. You're not giving up your feminism. You're not giving up your financial independence. And by the way, there's lots of different ways in which to slice that pie, and those sort of technicals are in the book. You're also now accepting the fact that this career pause is not a life pause, that you are. But I think the foundational piece of this is saying, yes, I'm pausing my career to raise my kids, but I'm also pausing my career to make room for myself to grow too. And I think that that's even the most type A people, right? Yes, I am like self-described ambitious, intentional. You can still fall into the very popular trap. And you and I've talked about this research again from the American Mothers on Pause survey. We all fall into this trap that our top 3 success metrics. We've gone from the linear track where success at the end of the year was measured by like clients won or salary raises and promotions. And when that goes away, it's very easy to say, well, I guess success is now how well behaved my kids are, how happy they are, how great my marriage is. And the reality is that so many, especially the kids part and their behavior part, is just, I mean, it's out of your control. And so it's a surefire way to feel like a failure. But it also doesn't let you dignify this time as also being for yourself. And so whether or not whoever's listening, if you do nothing else, if you do not read this book, I do think a lot about how do you use this time? You have been like on this track and everyone has been laying out for you what success looks like. This is one of the opportune times where you get to say, when I look back, what will have made it worth it? What will make me feel proud about how I spent this time? And goals sound really contrived. I know they do, but really start that middle section with goal setting, because I think they act as a reminder that you are moving forward. And if you do nothing else, one activity I have in that chapter is write in great detail who and where you want to be in 5 years. Who are you spending time with? How do you feel in your body? How do you feel in your mind? What are you spending time on? What's the vibe in your home? It's not like you're going to suddenly be that person tomorrow, but what it will often do is reveal to you your most authentic goals. Meaning, when I did that exercise, I talked about writing. I talked about feeling more calm. I talked about having a silly household. And when I was able to sort of boil that down to really measurable things that I could do at that point with 2 little kids, right under the age of 3 at home, it became, well, okay, well, for this quarter, something measurable I could do is on emotion and calm and regulation and reactivity. I'm going to listen to a podcast every week, or I'm going to read a different article about emotion and women. On writing, I'm going to get that free Squarespace. I'm going to write 3 posts a week about something I care about, which at the time was work and women, which, obviously those little seeds led to this. And then on a silly household, I'm going to have a dance party every single Monday. Right. And those things, as they aged into school, I had more capacity and those measures changed, but it helped point me in the direction of this time is also for me. And it also, to the point of getting help, it also reminded me that to feel fulfilled, I was going to have to maybe let some things go in the supermom myth, right? Like I wasn't going to have the perfect house dream. My husband wasn't going to walk in and see this like perfectly curated home. We were going to like get a little lax with our dinners so that I could use naps and night times for this project that I was working on. Eventually it got to the point that we really thought about like, could we get a part-time babysitter? So, the goal sort of lay the foundation of, I'm going to walk through this stage of life. Yes, making room for them, but also with the right to grow myself too.
Yeah. That is honestly the best advice I've ever heard because
Mm.
it is even inspiring me to want to pause. And like that says a lot because I do think that it's such a gift to have like a moment in time where you don't have any expectations around like what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to use your time, how you're supposed to be structured. And it's almost to your earlier point, a challenge in and of itself to really force yourself to prioritize based on what you yourself want. And I think it's such a healthy exercise to do at this time in our lives where we're really sort of setting the foundation for the rest of our lives, right? The relationship we're going to have with our kids, the relationship we're going to have with our husbands, what we want to do with our careers. A lot of people do end up going back into the workforce, but like in what capacity? I think so many innovations come from this period of time that women are seeing the pains and the gaps of being a mom and raising children. So I love that advice. And I think even working moms can take it, like that we can be carving out time to be more intentional about what type of family we want and what are the goals that we want to be implementing on a regular basis to get there. I love that. So much of what we do is just like run through the motions. So I sometimes even feel that with when I'm taking my son out of the crib or my kids are waking up in the morning and there's like this set amount of time where I need to get them dressed. I need to feed them breakfast. I need to feed myself breakfast. I need to get myself ready for work. And I forget that like these are my delicious babies that I like want to enjoy. And this is my time with them to enjoy them. And I shouldn't be just rushing them out of their crib. I should be getting in the crib with them and playing with them and wrestling with them, and it's so easy to forget that when you're in the moment. But like trying to carve out that time to remember, like, what are my priorities and what am I trying to achieve? Like, why did I even have a family to begin with? Those are such important questions to be asking. So I love that.
Glad you called out that you don't have to take a full pause to be intentional about the time you're living in, right? Like
Yeah.
I actually been using the plane rides for tour stops to work on my 5-year vision now because, everyone's favorite question is always what's next. And it's allowing me to say, well, what is next? Like, I'm not ready to answer that. If I'm lucky, I get to keep doing this, but I want to do it in a way that works. And
Yeah.
what does works mean, right? Like, I think, there's a very like sort of surface definition of works, right? Like that there's not huge amounts of stress. But I think to dig deeper, I think giving ourselves ability to enjoy this, I think we've been fed this idea that we have to struggle through motherhood. It doesn't actually, no one gives you points for it at the end.
No.
Sad.
No. Okay. So I want to pivot to this idea of like quality time versus quantity of time. And I think a lot of moms, whether they work or they don't work, they're at risk of just like being present, but not really being present, whether it's because they're running through the checklist of the things that they have to do, or because they're also coordinating all the stuff that they need to get done on their phones. And so they're not really present and intentional with their kids in that moment in time. And I've also seen or heard at least 30 minutes of time is needed in order to like really bond with your kids on a daily basis. What did you find in your research about that? Because obviously, as someone who doesn't have all the time in the world to spend with their kids, like I have my approach, but I'm curious like what you have heard statistically moves the needle when it comes to spending time with your kids, removing the phone out of the equation, whether it's going to a class, whether it's reading them with them a book. Like what are some of the activities that you can do with them to make sure that you really are present and how much time is really needed to get that end result?
So I was pretty careful not to tread too much into the parenting expertise in the book because my expertise is in my own children and my own family when it comes to parenting, but I cannot claim to be a parenting expert. I got the privilege to interview a number of experts for especially the chapters around designing rhythms and getting help. And I will tell you that the things I heard that were really helpful to me is rhythms. I think predictable kids feel safe with routine just like we do, right? So, you know, allowing your kids, allowing when you're creating your rhythms, letting go of the pieces that aren't important to you. So you brought up bath time. Like if bath time gives you stress, there was actually a woman who actually cited this, let it go, because being present with your child during bath time, because that's what you think being a good mother is, when really like it makes you clench your teeth and you're just miserable. That's not enjoyment for you. It's not enjoyment for them. Outsourcing that or giving that to your partner as his to do or her to do, that's where the like gold is. But deciding like, you know what I really love is art. And on this day or at this time, for me, it was every morning for a period of time. Now it's on Saturday mornings, right? Like it's not every, but that's our connective tissue because I happen to love art. So they see that with me. I also have a high tolerance for mess. So like, I don't mind making slime over and over again but like that might not be the next thing for someone else. And it's so important in that rhythm section. Joe Piazza actually talked about, when you're scrolling your feed, we've created this composite of all the things that people do with their kids or do in their home. And I think deciding which of those is actually of meaning to you and in your family and allows you to thrive with your child. I think that piece is really important because we've sort of created this ideal that is actually just a corner of everyone's life and they're letting go of and optimizing things on their end. I think the other piece that was really helpful for me personally, it was in chapter 6 around health, which was similar. And Julie Morgenstern, who's a time management expert and coach, said, you're allowed to make a list of everything that doesn't, what like we've been fed this idea that we have to do everything. Figure out the things you want to outsource to allow yourself to focus. So that was a lot around the lines of what we just talked about. Tova Klein said, do you know Tova? I'm
No.
sure you. She lives locally. She's fabulous. She runs the Barnard Center. She wrote How Toddlers Thrive. She's actually more recently wrote Raising Resilience. And she talked about kids don't thrive if they have a singular caregiver. The kids who are safest feel like they're loved by a web of safe adults. And I thought that that was so empowering in our ability to say, I am going to outsource bath time because that's going to be a special thing this person does with their special other adult, whether that be a grandparent or a fun babysitter or your husband. And it allows them to remember memories and presence with you as something that gave you joy too. I think from a like child's mind perspective, they say like 5 minutes of no like phone free time. I think that's like best practice, but I don't even like to wade into those waters because it's just not my expertise.
No,
The one
that's
thing I will tell you that I do personally, and I recommend to everyone, and I know everyone rolls their eyes, but I put my phone away. It's just like
yeah.
that's like I just put my phone away. We have a console table when you walk in. I expect phones there. I just think that there's no way to allow yourself to be bored around, and it's okay to be bored around your kids.
Yeah.
There's boring parts of parenthood. There's boring parts of every job. I think allowing yourself to like, when I get bored, I get like really curious about where are they right now? Like, where are they development? I kind of intellectualize it. And so that's been helpful to me too.
I feel like the reason why so many people struggle with the outsourcing piece, like I know my husband, for example, it's so hard for him to let our nanny do anything, even though we have the nanny there, because he has so much guilt around how much we both are out of the house that when we are in the house, he feels very adamant that one of us should be present with the kids. And usually that's me.
Mm,
And so I sort of have been struggling to almost like convince him to use the help. Like I
mm,
also need a break on the weekends. I can't be a full caretaker the entire weekend. Like, yes, I do want to spend quality of time with my kids, but I don't want to feed them dinner and I don't want to feed them. I don't want to bathe them. Let me put my feet up and use the nanny. It's like it's crazy. And so I feel like a lot of the tension around utilization of help almost starts with the couple that like they're not on the same page. And so therefore either the mom or the father feels a sense of guilt to do it all themselves. Like where do you see more of the guilt coming from? Is it intrinsic in the mother? Is it an in-law? Is it a husband? Or a partner? Like, where do you see most people struggling with this? Or where do you think mom guilt comes from?
So the research on blocks for childcare is number one is financial, but if we sort of put that on the shelf, then the next, because I do think there's actually a lot of creative ways to get childcare, sometimes free, that we talk about in the book. Sadly, our childcare system, for all the reasons we know, are broken, but there are options. And I would still say that the very close second is trust, and the third is guilt. Trust, I think, will often come from sort of like gatekeeping of like no one else can do it quite the same way. And I think it's really important for kids to get an experience with other, and that is not my expertise. Tova Klein said that, very important for kids to see that other people do things different ways, right? Like that actually enhances their resilience and capacity to operate through the world. I think the guilt piece comes from our like families of origin, our experience with help. So we have the inverse in our family. My husband grew up in the city. He grew up around a lot of help, literally would outsource. He's the most hands-on dad. And still, if he could, he would outsource everything. I grew up with no help and have often, however, my mother was the first to say, please get help because it'll allow you to enjoy motherhood in a way that I wasn't able to. And so, there's all sorts of complexities, but you can imagine that those feed your sort of perception. I think, oftentimes where guilt will is also us rewriting real time what our expectation, what like the disconnect between what we imagined for family life and what's actually possible. That sort of chasm. Yeah. I think allowing couples space, kind of like we do for to have a conversation. I think those money meetings are really important because it's like family admin meetings that force time to be like, what is our vision for this year ahead? I actually think is also a really important time to sit down. Actually, the goal setting, there is a section about the family. And I think being able to say and have space to say, these are the things that are important to me. And we're going to put the guilt and the finances, but in a dream world, what would I be able to do? What would I like? How would we show up as parents? What would the culture in our family look like? And then figure out from there, well, something to achieve that, we need to be resourced and supported in X, Y, or Z area. But I think allowing the conversation to start not about help or no help, but what do we want? And also, what do we want just for right now, right? You may not have a nanny when your children age into, so you might not have the same. This is for a period. You might also have a different relationship to work then. I'm not saying you're going to, but something will shift. But for your age, the demandingness of your kids versus, by the way, my husband turned to me and was like, why are you even in the bathroom when they're having baths? They're not supposed, they're gone. They're not, that, things will shift, but allowing yourself the space to sit down with your partner and say, what do we want our family to feel like in many aspects? Because oftentimes it will include a degree of support to get there, but it takes having to decide together on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the mom guilt thing is so interesting because everyone's source of mom guilt is different, even though we all have some degree of guilt, I think it's because we fear judgment from different people. And some of us care more about some people's judgment than others.
I think women in the gray area, and when I talk about the gray area, it's the vast in between of the old ideas of stay-at-home and working mother, right? Traditional corporate work and fully at home. I think when you're in between and you have self-determined work, meaning you can set your schedule to some degree, I think there's another source of guilt, which is you are determining when you're choosing to spend time away. And I think as soon as you have any choice point, any moment where you are choosing, what a gift to get to choose, and also what a burden, right? That burden, some is am I making the right choice? Could I be making a different choice? Would one choice be approved of differently? And I think it's no different than what we talked about before, which is that it's that intuition of I know that this is better for me and my family. And I know that if someone else was watching, they may disapprove. And I know that they'd have less context about my mental health, my capacity, what else I have going on, what me and my partner are going through, the sort of age and stage of my children. There's just so much context that so many of us are missing when we assign judgments. And when we assign inversely, when we judge, and this is from Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote The Four Agreements, a book I highly recommend. And he really breaks down judgment as people making sense of their own choices and experiences, right? The person judging about not breastfeeding is the one who's getting a lot of self-worth from nursing and or the opposite, right? Whatever. And I think the same goes for work. I think the same goes for childcare. Oftentimes when you feel judgment, there's a little bit of envy there, right? I think that comes up. And so we create this circuitous relationship of judgment around every choice because there's just so many choices on the table. Right. And everyone's trying to make the best one for themselves and their family.
So you talked about flexibility as being almost like a curse. But I feel like every mom today is looking for a job that affords them flexibility, whether it's that they work remotely, whether it's that they're their own, boss. What do you think is like the ideal, well, or rather sort of said differently, for people who are not their own boss, what advice would you give to an employer who is trying to create a good work environment for moms?
So I want to restate the flexibility. I don't think is a curse. I think it's a blessing and a burden. I think the
Right.
burden comes in scenarios where women are in flexible work situations but do not have support to do
Hmm.
those. It's just
Hmm.
because your work is part-time doesn't mean you don't need childcare. Like
Hmm.
get into situations where people are working and trying to do both. And it is very hard to do both things. And I think that that is the risk we're running into right now. And, or I think the other risk that happens, and, going back to the research around success, when we asked women about success metrics, I think I've shared this with you, only 4% of women cited their mental and physical health, which was tied with a clean house, right? And so if we're looking at that in terms of our value for our own health and wellness, then you're looking at women who are so excited to have a flexible work situation that allows them to meet their family's needs. But then it becomes, I'm going to work and then I'm going to be with my family. And
Hmm.
I know because I've been in this, and the thing that quickly falls is their own care, right? And so the margin starts missing. The margin that maybe if you work in a traditional role, you have a little bit more sort of built-in commute time, built-in socialization. And so those are some of my like worries about that. That said, my goal with this ultimately is that we allow and empower more of the sort of dismantling of the black and white ideas and open up more options in between so women can dial up or dial down. And the research also shows that when women are returning, they are putting flexibility above all other things. 87% say it's like their number one criterion. So we know it needs to happen. What I think is actually really interesting is this idea of like, there are a lot of ideas of what flexibility looks like. I think what's really interesting is fractional and part-time fractional roles for small to medium businesses. I think
Yeah.
there's like a whole future right now. And I'm living it. I'm sure you're living it, which is female founded businesses, because women are realizing, okay, maybe A, we're problem solvers and we're coming across problems. And then B, we want to design work on our own terms. And then because they're smart and they want really good talent, they're getting part time or fractional talent. And I have 3 moms who work for me, 2 that work 10 hours, 1 that works 5 hours. They're best in class, but they
Yeah.
also have young kids and need time. So
Yeah.
we're creating this sub, and I'm one of many. So we're creating this sub economy, right? That allow women options to pursue professional life alongside family. So that's one piece. I think in the more corporate environment, you're seeing a wave of returnships. You're seeing a way, which a returnship is essentially like a quota to hit for bringing women or men back to the workforce after having had extended leaves. I think the other piece that's interesting is they're trying to adopt like essentially like rotational programs where they backstop people's mat leaves with fractional workers. So they're trying to come up with creative solutions, but I actually think what's more helpful is there's a woman I met down in Dallas on the tour, and she said to me, I negotiated a 2-day work week at HSBC. And I was like, well, how did you do that? I mean, I've been trying to do this work for 8 years. How did you crack them? She said, I called a friend who had figured out a 2-day work week at JP Morgan. And I asked for her template and I brought that template to a manager. And so, 2 things to point out there. One is the incredible opportunity we have to create a brain trust amongst each other, where for her to know that her friend had a friend meant someone had said, oh, I'm hearing about this woman who's working part-time. They were owning these part-time stories of the in between, and they were being really explicit and not gate and sharing the resources amongst ourselves so that women can go with more plans to present. And what the managers can do is be open to like, let's trial that. I
Hmm.
always say to women when negotiating flexibility, say it to your manager, let's try this for 3 months. We'll try it for 6 weeks, because then they don't feel as much like, oh my God, we're like signing up for who knows what. But I think us coming together to create more solutions and then managers being more open and nimble to shaping the opportunities
Totally.
based on ideas is
Totally. And I also think that's a good time for the mom to be trialing whether this works for you, for the husband to be trialing whether this works for you. Because again, to your earlier point, going part time sometimes is harder than being full time because you're being so torn into multiple directions and you're not actually getting the help that you need. And then you just you're the one that loses, right? Like, I think part-time is hard.
It is, unless you, so I had a phenomenal part-time experience when I was working for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
When I started working part-time for myself, that's where all hell broke
Right. Okay.
loose,
That's a good point.
because there is no part-time when it's
Yeah.
your own thing.
Right.
Right. So
Right.
then
Right.
it got all mishmashed. But when I was compartmentalized and I was like, I need to show up and I need childcare, it was much more black and white. So there's so many different permutations. I think freelance is an interesting one. I think so
Totally.
many people think of freelance as like the gold standard, but the reality of freelance is it's great if you're just trying to stay connected. But if you're trying to meet an income target, there's a real hustle that you need to know if you're ready for. So in all of these options, there's obviously pros and cons, but it's great that there are options, and that's
Yeah.
what we need.
Yeah. I do think that it's increasing more and more, especially thanks to people like you who are encouraging more people to speak openly about what they need. So thank you. So as we wrap up, I have two final questions that you can summarize into one answer. But one is, there's just so many good tidbits of information and guidance that you put into your book. But if there's one that you could encourage all people to leave this conversation with, what would that be? And as you are in this stage of your life where by every measure of success, I think you have achieved so much success, what in your words would you define as success to you now in this moment in time?
I suppose it's actually one and the same. I really tell women all the time, because it often comes up in answering the question, what do you do? Which is like a universal stumbling block for women when they pause, right? They have so much wrapped up in their like pithy answer. I run brand at a tech startup. I always offer the words right now. Right now, I get to be with my kids. We'll see what comes next. I found myself word vomiting again recently when someone asked me what I did, because I've gotten so much peace from being with my kids. I didn't know how to say that I really haven't been. I mean, I've been with them on the weekends, but really it's been quite a spring or winter. And I said, right now I'm seeing this work out into the world and we'll see what comes next. And I think success is that trust I've built to be able to keep doing this work in a way that allows me to be with my family and make sure that that remains my priority for the long haul. I think redefining presence for what they need in this stage of life. I think they need something completely different. In fact, they need more independence. They need more other loving adults in their life. So I think success is trusting myself to figure it out and redefine it, but I'm still in a moment of redefining it.
Amazing. And the piece of advice is then just let other
Right.
people define say it in your own words, because I'm sure you're going to say it more articulately than me.
Please just keep using that phrase right now whenever you're in a decision point, because I think right now I'm working on this. Just right now I need help. Like, we need help on the weekends. Right now we just let you be able to own that this is working for this season, and
I
it
love that.
gives you permission to come back and re-examine later.
Amen. Amazing. Thank you so much. This was so insightful, empowering. I'm sure everyone left feeling great and energized to go sit down and map out the rest of their lives. I'm kidding, but seriously. So where can people learn more about you? Follow Mother Untitled, buy the book.
All the things you can follow on Mother Untitled. I post daily, and that's really a stream of consciousness. You can come to the site. There's so many great free resources if you are in the in-between, from a jobs board to coaching Rolodex and resume writers, great toolkits on everything from returning to work to post-nuptial agreements. And you can subscribe to the newsletter as well. And of course, get the book. I don't say this lightly. I think it's an incredible roadmap for women who are navigating any pause or shift with your work and family.
It truly, truly is. Thank you for putting all of your love, sweat, and tears into it, because I know it was a lot. It was a lot. And again, no one could have written it better than you.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Get Well Better by The Lambie. Your support truly means the world to us. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify, or listen wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram at The Lambie for behind the scenes content and updates. We would not be able to grow without your support and referrals. So please send this podcast to a friend, a loved one, anyone who you think is interested in learning more about health and wellness and navigating this maze of an industry.